Hello and welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I founded Oxford Clay, an eco-conscious pottery company. So on this podcast, we're going to be talking about all things pottery related, often with an eco-conscious twist, and I can't wait to share it with you. Let's go. Hello and welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine, and so today I wanted to talk to you about on the episode saving energy in pottery. So this is obviously really relevant for potters because pottery is a kind of artisan industrial process and needs energy in order to happen. So, there's energy involved in obviously heating, lighting the space, firing work, maybe using a wheel, some electrical equipment, stuff like that. So it's really topical for potters, and I wanted to talk to you about 5 really good things you can do to save energy in pottery. Okay, so the first one might not be relevant to everybody, but it's just really important to say basically from the outset that the more energy efficient your kiln is, the more obviously the more energy you'll save. So when I was first looking for a kiln, this one behind me, if you're listening on the podcast, I've got a kiln behind me, and it's the first ever kiln I bought. And when I was looking to buy it, I found this kiln which was like really big, and it used a domestic energy supply. I was like, great, it can just, I don't need to get like phase 3 kind of energy supply, they call it in EK, when you need an industrial supply of electricity to power your kiln. So it's just like normal domestic supply. It went up to stoneware temperatures, which is what I needed, and it was really big and quite cheap as well, so it was brilliant. I thought, yes, this is great. And then I sort of was reading more about it and just looked at how much energy it took to do each firing. And what I realized was, although it looked kind of better in lots of ways, other kilns which were like quite a lot more expensive but much better insulated and actually kind of smaller inside actually use massively less electricity. Like it was half as much electricity than the other kilns. So after weighing it all up, I just thought, well, I want a kiln which is going to cost less, to run, over the long term. So, it's something to really consider. Like if you're thinking about, buying a kiln or buying a new kiln, if you're thinking about buying an electric kiln, because, you obviously can get gas kilns as well. But in terms of like, electric kilns, we're just there are quite variations between how much energy each kiln uses. So it's really worth looking into it and trying to get the most energy efficient one, because it will save electricity and effectively will save you money in the long term. So okay, so right, now we've got the kiln. We said about the kiln, obviously that's not applicable to everybody, but there are 4 other things which could be applicable. So the first one is that a lot of potteries, so like you might have seen this used, or you might have used this yourself in a commercial or educational setting, pottery studio, and we definitely used this when I went to evening classes. So we used basically a heat gun, which is they're designed really for like decorators, for like stripping paint, and they're basically like an electric kind of heated kind of gun. It's a bit like a hairdryer, but like gets a lot hotter, and they've got these heating elements in, and you can basically use them to like dry pottery. So if you've just made a pot I know you need to dry it really fast. You've got like an evening class. You're like, oh, I've only got like an hour left of my evening class. Like I got to go in a minute, and like I've got to, attach a handle. Then, generally at evening classes, people will like, use them for drying their work like really fast and stuff. But they're massively energy intensive, and I think this is probably because they get to such high temperatures, and the heating elements in them are like, they get really hot because they're made for stripping paint. They get very, very, very hot. And what I found out was that just a normal desk fan actually does a very similar job. And when I calculated the energy use of a desk fan and a heat gun, paint stripping heat gun, I found that the desk fan uses 1/90th of the electricity of a heat gun, which is just like incredible. So if you're, say, like you want to dry some work, you could just set up a fan and it will move the air over the pot you're trying to dry. And yeah, it does take longer than a heat gun, but it will dry it in a way that is very similar. So it's like it takes a little bit longer, but it's like a 1/90th of the energy use. So that if you're doing that quite a lot, if you're trying to dry out handles to attach onto a pot or something, different bits you want to dry at different rates, then a desk fan is such a good top tip to use. Okay, so my third top tip is to think about like how your work kind of fits in the kiln. So when I first started making pottery, I used to make these quite wide bowls, and I could only fit like 2 or 3 on a kiln shelf, and because in a glaze firing they can't like touch, and so there was just like so much wasted space. Like in the middle I had a triangle, and then I had like just space all around the sides, and I just thought, this is like crazy. I'm just wasting all this space, and I stopped making them basically. I just thought this is too much wasted space in the kiln. And so I started making things which were like much smaller and could just fit together a lot more in the kiln. So, obviously this like might not apply, to you, or like, this might not be something you want to do, but it's just something that popped into my mind as like a potential energy saving tip is like, the shape and size of your work can be fitted together perhaps like better in the kiln space, and that means you can fire more, and that means at one time, and that means you're having to fire the kiln less. So yeah, might not be applicable to you, but like something to think about definitely. Okay, so my fourth top tip is this is something that's been quite like a painful thing for me to learn, is that sometimes when you have something that is like not quite right, so you've made something and you've either knocked it, or like a crack's appearing in it at the greenware stage, or you might just kind of think, I don't know if I really like this thing. It's really good to ditch it at that stage, and it's very hard to let it go. But if you carry on down the process and like you're firing it at like bisque firing stage, or like you're gonna fire it to like glaze firing stage, just it's kind of like a massive waste of your time and energy, electricity, money. If you're not like 100% about it, it could be, unless it's an experiment, it could just be something to ditch at the greenware stage. So this has been quite a painful lesson for me to learn. I've had to really let go of this, and because I used to have this thing where like, say like a small crack appeared or something, I was like, well, I'm sure it'll be okay. Maybe the glaze will kind of cover it up, or I don't know, maybe. And no, that doesn't happen. It just basically gets loads worse at the glaze firing stage. Cracks actually open up rather than like disappearing. So this is what I do now as like a practice. I just have to be like, no, let it go at the greenware stage, and then I can reclaim it, and it's not just a pot now that can't go back to clay, and like being a huge waste of energy. So yeah, that's like my fourth top tip. And then, and then the fifth tip, which is actually my favorite tip, and something I've been really practicing recently and sort of getting really into, and that is the practice of raw glazing. So until like a couple of years ago, I never actually even heard of raw glazing. It's not something that I'd practiced at evening classes, but I'd read up on it, and it's something that I've now been like really practicing. I've got really into. So raw glazing effectively is applying the glaze to a pot when it's either at the leather hard stage or at the greenware stage, and then firing it straight up to the glaze firing. So you're effectively completely missing out that bisque fire. So you never have to do a bisque fire. So it's amazing. You're basically going to save all that energy that you would have spent in the bisque firing stage. So I have actually been practicing this on quite large items. It seems to work pretty well for items that are like quite big and sturdy. Because when you're applying glaze to an item, a pot that's, at the greenware stage or at the leather hard stage, it can actually disintegrate, and quite often that does happen. So, you might have to take some kind of measures, like, adding paper to clay is a really good way of making clay stronger. You have to also use the right clay, and you have to use the right glaze. So not all glazes actually work for raw glazing. But I've been raw glazing large pots, like planters, where I've basically been like painting on glaze, and then I've also been glazing them on the inside. And the pot seems to be able to take it without disintegrating. And then I just fire, so I do that at the greenware stage, and I just fire straight up to stoneware glaze firing temperatures, and they are fine, exactly the same as if I would have bisque fired it, without all the faff of bisque firing, without all the energy of bisque firing as well, and the electricity, and money. So I'd really recommend raw glazing as a practice. It's like really fun as well to do, and just seeing, whether your clay and glaze can take it. If you wanted some raw glaze recipes, there's 10 raw glaze recipes in the book Eco-Conscious Pottery Glazing. Make your own pottery glazes with minimal harm to humans, animals and the environment. That's a book which you can buy from the Oxford Clay website, or you can buy a paper copy on Amazon as well. And the links are actually in the show notes if you want to buy one of those books. But so that's got 10 recipes that I have tested with the raw glazing method and found that they work really well. They basically look exactly the same at the raw glaze stage as if you bisque fired it, then applied the glaze. So that's my fifth and final tip for saving energy in pottery. So we'll go through those tips again, top tips. Okay, just as a little rundown, like summary at the end. Okay, so the first one is try and use an energy efficient kiln. You might not even need one at the moment. Or you might, do your pottery in a communal pottery setting, so it's not applicable to you. But like if you were at the stage where you're like about to buy a new kiln and you're not sure which one to go with, cheaper one or, more energy efficient one, energy efficiency all the way, because it will save you money and energy, obviously, long term. So, okay, number 2, not using a heat gun, because they use so much energy, and you can just get almost the same results from a desk fan with 1/90th of the energy use. Number 3, can your pots tessellate better in the kiln? Can they fit together? Do you need maybe like an additional kiln shelf or half a shelf or something, just to make everything fit better in the kiln? Are there certain shapes that are wasting a lot of space? Again, that's maybe not something that everybody wants to do, but just, if you think about is there something you can make that will fill a little space in between some big bowls you're making or something? Just something to think about. Number 4, so not firing stuff that you probably just don't even want in the long term, or it's got a fault basically that's going to get worse down the line. Something I'm still coming to terms with. And number 5, raw glazing. So, practicing raw glazing, applying glaze at the greenware stage or leather hard stage, and just getting rid of that bisque firing completely and just firing straight up to glaze temperatures. So I hope you've liked these top 5 tips on energy saving tips, and happy potting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.